And joining me now with more on the situation in Ukraine is Eugene Chausovsky. He is a Eurasia Analyst at Stratfor Global Intelligence. He joins us live from Austin, Texas. Eugene, thank you so much for joining us. First, I'd like to get your reaction to Sergei Lavrov's comments, basically saying the United States is running the show in Ukraine. Beyond the words, though, do you think Russia will respond with something more significant?
Well, I think that the Russian response will largely be driven by both the Ukrainian response and how the U.S. backs Ukraine. I think that if Ukraine proves to be more assertive in some of its counterterrorism operations like it tried to do last week, we can certainly see a greater Russian response. But for now, I think Russia is still waiting to see what Ukraine does at the moment.
Read some of your commentary, and it seems that you're of the opinion that Russia doesn't want to use military force as this situation in eastern Ukraine progresses. But it announced that its Navy launched military exercises. Do you think that this is all in response to the U.S. sending paratroopers to Eastern Europe, as we just mentioned?
Well, certainly launching military exercises is a tactic that Russia uses quite a bit, especially to pressure countries that it deems as acting counter to its interests. We've seen this happen, obviously, near the Ukrainian border. We've seen this happen near the Baltics, near Moldova. I think that Russia is essentially just sending a message that they need to be much more careful, especially now in moving forward in eastern Ukraine.
So if Russia, in the bigger picture here, doesn't want to use military force, what do you think is happening behind the scenes as far as de-escalating the situation?
Well, I think that certainly the armed separatist groups that are operating in eastern Ukraine, there's clear indications that Russia has at least some sort of influence over these groups. And essentially, these groups allow Russia to accomplish its goal, or at least to further its goal, without going forward with a major military operation. And that goal is to undermine the Ukrainian government. So I think this is the measure that Russia will likely take in the near future.
And you mentioned the influence, and I want to ask you about Vladimir Putin's influence. How much influence does he actually have? If there's some sort of tipping point, if something is overreached, do they have enough influence to contain them, or to maybe influence them to not make certain moves?
Right. Well, I think it would be misleading to think that Russia completely controls these armed groups. And we've even seen in these initial days since the Geneva Agreement was reached that a lot of these groups, they basically just rejected the position reached in the agreement, which Russia was a party to. So certainly Russia does have a great deal of influence, especially over some of the more professional-looking armed men that are sort of taking over some of these buildings, but it does not have complete control over all of the militias.
NATO is also strengthening its military in the region. What do you think would lead to some sort of escalation or war?
Well, I mean, I think there's already been an escalation that's happening, obviously, with the announcement of the U.S. With a semi-permanent rotation in the Baltics and Poland. We've heard Lavrov's comments. But I think there's still major constraints to an actual war taking place. Certainly, Russia doesn't want to send in its full military force into eastern Ukraine because it doesn't know how the West will respond. And the U.S. and NATO aren't exactly looking to start military operations in Eastern Europe either. So I think the constraints to a major military operation are still very much there.
All right, Eugene Chausovsky from Stratfor Global Intelligence, thank you so much for joining us from Austin, Texas.